Hello students, welcome back to 2D video game design. Today we are going to be adding some sprites and animations to our game. So let's take a look real quick at what we've got. I've got this knob and then it has left and right movement, and in addition to that, if it moves off of the cliff, it does fall. So let's go ahead and add some artwork to this. Now for this, I have created 3 different sprites. So I've got a walking animation, and you can see how to do this by looking up a walk cycle tutorial. Now, full disclosure, I am not a great pixel artist, and so I threw this together pretty quickly, and I think it's going to be pretty good for what we're doing here. There's an idle animation, we're just standing still, and here is a jumping animation. So in order to get these to where I can use them, I'm going to export them. And this is just a single frame, so I can just download it like that. This is just a single frame, so I'm just going to download that. However, this walking animation is a sprite sheet, so I do want to export the sprite sheet of it. Now coming over here into Unity, I'm going to go ahead and go into sprites. Here we've got my tiles that I made earlier, and I can move this off to the side. Let's go ahead and look in my folder. Here are my downloads, and you can see the 3 sprites that I've just created, so I can just drag those in and import them. Now first of all, let's go ahead and put the idle in on the player. So instead of being a knob, let's go ahead and drag the idle on here. Okay, and now I see he turned huge, so let's go ahead and scale him down. Keeping in mind that this gray line right here is where the screen is, so we're going to shrink him down to a reasonable size there. And let's go ahead and adjust the box collider, because right now it thinks the collider is just right there. So I can increase the height and increase the width. And then if I need to fine tune it, oh, actually that came pretty close. Okay. So now, if I push play, I can see what my game looks like. Okay, that's a little more gamey there. It's a little bit better than moving around a little white ball, but I can still fall off the cliff. All right, so I've got an idle frame, a jump frame, and then right now I have a walk frame. This is just one sprite with 8 different frames built into it. So I want to make it so this is 8 different frames. This is similar to the slicing that we did with our 9 tile platform, but I'm going to tell it that this is multiple sprites now. And full rect, and now I'm going to go into sprite editor, and I can see my 8 different frames here. So I'm going to go ahead and slice it, and I see right here I've got a 4x2 grid of sprites, and so I can tell it grid by cell count, and I've got 4 columns and 2 rows. Let's go ahead and slice it. Now that nice and evenly sliced up my sprite sheet, click apply. I've got all 8. There we have it. Okay, so now I would like to make this an animation. So I'm going to go ahead and open the Animator window. I'm sorry, the animation window. So I'm going to go Window, Animation, Animation. And this is going to open the animation window. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to dock it at the bottom so I can have lots of room to work. Now I am going to need some of my project files, so I'm going to move that up here so I can see my project files at the same time as the animator. Okay, so right now I don't have an animatable object selected, so I'm going to select the player. Player is an animatable object. So it's saying to begin animating player, create an animator and an animation clip. Okay, let's go ahead and say create. It's going to ask me where I want to create this. Now, before I go ahead and start creating, let's organize it. I want this to be in assets, but let's make a new folder for animation. Okay, and let's go ahead and make Mr. P underscore idle. Okay, so now I'm working on the idle animation, and all I have to do here is take the idle frame and drag it into my animation. And I can click preview to see what it looks like. That's not much of a preview because that's already the frame that we were on. So that's it. I have an idle animation. It's a single frame. Let's go ahead and create a new clip though. Let's do one that's a little bit more involved. And let's go, I'm in my animation folder. We'll do Mr. P underscore walk. Okay, now for the walking one, I've got 8 frames. So I'm gonna click on my first frame and then scroll down until I get to my last frame. If I hold down Shift and then click, I've selected all 8 frames. And then I can just drag these into the timeline and it'll place them right here in sequence. So now for preview, I can push play and I see it does this. Now that's a little faster than I'm comfortable with, so what I can do is adjust the sample rate right here. I think 12 will probably do it, and you see that spreads it out. So now if I click play, that's a much smoother walk. Now, for some versions of Unity, this samples field is not here. You can put it there. Right here is the menu bar. And right here it says show sample rate. So if I unclick it, it'll look like this, and that's what a lot of people start off with. So if I say show sample rate, that'll show up, and now I can see that. Okay, let's go ahead and make one more animation. We'll call this one Mr. P jump. Save that. And we'll grab the jump frame. Okay, we'll click preview, and we see that's what the jump sprite looks like. The next thing that we want to do is actually make it so the game animates. So if I click here, you see it starts, and as I'm walking, nothing happens. And this is because it's on the idle animation right now. And I want to make it so it can switch from the idle animation to the walk animation. So in order to do this, I'm going to click Window, Animation, and now I'm going to open the Animator. Now, once I do this, you can see that all of the animations that I've just created are all present here. Now, this green block here is what's going to happen. This is representing my sprite being created. Now, once it's created, it's going to go straight into the idle animation. Now what I want it to do is go from the idle animation. If I'm moving, go ahead and head into the walk animation. So in order to do this, I have to create a transition. So I'm going to click on idle. I want to go from idling to walking. If I right click, I can say make a transition, and then I'm going to point it to walk. In the same way, I can click on walk, right click and say make a transition, and go back to idling, because I should be able to go back and forth between idling and walking. Now, how do I trigger this transition? So I'm going to click on the transition between idling and walking. Okay, so it's saying right here, conditions list is empty. I need to give it a condition to move. So what's going to happen that's going to make it go from idling to walking? Well, that would be if I start moving. So in order to trigger that, I'm going to go over here to parameters, and I'm going to create a new parameter by clicking here, and it's asking me what type of parameter I want. Well, how fast I'm moving is a float. So I'm just going to call that speed. Right now speed is 0 because I'm standing still. If I click on this transition now, I say go ahead and add a condition to start walking. Well, we're going to start walking if the speed is greater than 0. We're going to stop walking. We're going to go from walk to idle. If speed is less than, we'll give it a really small number like 0.1. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how that looks. Okay, I'm going to start moving, and nothing happened. Now here's why. I created the parameter in the animator, and I said it's called speed, but I didn't code anything that would change the speed parameter in the animator. So in order to change that, what I need to do is go back to my project, in my assets, here's my script. I need to code it so I can change the speed parameter. So I'm gonna make a section right here, animation variables. The first thing that I have to do is I have to be able to access the animator. So in order to do that, I'm going to do public animator, and it's called the animator. I'm gonna save it real quick, and since it's public, I can assign it from Unity, so I'm gonna go back to Unity. Wait for it to load here. If I click on player now, on player controller, here's the animator, and it says I have none, but here's the animator that's attached to the player. So all I have to do in order to assign the animator is grab it and just drag it right into the animator. Okay, let's go back to the script. Okay, so right here, we declare what our horizontal input is. Right after we declare what the horizontal input is, we should tell the animator how fast we're going. So we're gonna say animator dot set float, and then which float am I going to set? I'm going to set the speed float, and then what am I going to set it to? I'm going to set it to whatever the horizontal input is. Okay, Control S to save it. Let's go back and look at how that looks. Okay, here I am, not moving at all, so you can see that I have that idle frame, and then I'm going to move to the right, and you see that it starts moving. I'm going to move to the left, and nothing. Again to the right, and the walk animation triggers. One other thing I want to point out, I'm just going to tap right just for a moment. So if I just tap right, even though it's just a momentary tap, that whole animation plays. So there's two things that I want to address here. The first thing is, why isn't the walk movement, the walk animation, why isn't that triggering when I move left? It goes back to idle. If you think about it, the horizontal input when I'm moving left is negative, and we've set it to only do the walking animation if speed is greater than 0. So what we want to do is take this horizontal input and take the absolute value of it. And if you know your algebra, absolute value is the distance from 0, which means it's always positive. So I'm just going to put horizontal input in parentheses right here. And in order to take the absolute value, that's part of the mathf library, dot ABS for absolute value, and that's going to turn this value positive. So regardless of what it is, if it's negative 0.8, it'll turn it into positive 0.8. If it's positive 0.4, it'll stay positive 0.4. So let's see how that worked out. There we go. And if I go to the left, the walk animation triggers. Now, one other thing, if I go over here to the animator, right here I have idling transitioning to walk and walk transitioning back to idling. I'm going to click on the transition from walk back to idle. And here's the thing, right here it says has exit time. If I say that it does have exit time, that means it's going to allow the animation to complete itself before switching to the idle animation. And for this case, I want it to stop animating as soon as I stop moving. So I'm going to turn off exit time here. And even though this one doesn't actually have an animation, it's just a single frame, I'm going to go ahead and turn off exit time here. So now I should see that it very quickly moves, and then I stop and it stops right away. Move backwards and stop, it stops right away. There we go. Now, another obvious problem is that when he moves to the right, he moves right just fine, but when he moves to the left, he walks backwards. Now, how can I make it so he actually faces left when I want to go backwards? The first way that I could do it is I could go and draw separate animations where he's facing left, and I could switch so I have a right walk and a left walk. Now, what that'll do is that'll let you have control of the lighting. So you see right here, he's got highlighting on his right and then shading on his left. If you want to stay in control of your lighting, you could make another sprite where he's facing to the left with all of the shading correct. However, if you don't care about that, what we can do is we can just flip it. So if I go to the player and look in the inspector, I have the sprite renderer, and you see that it's got this option right here to flip. And if I check this, I can make it flip in either direction. Now, I only want that to flip when I'm facing the other direction, so let's go ahead and do that in code. Now, the first thing is, just like the animator, I need to be able to access the sprite renderer. So I'm just going to say I have a public sprite renderer called sprite renderer. Control S to save, and then jump back to Unity to assign it. Okay, there's my sprite renderer. It's not assigned, so I want to go and find it. There it is. I'm going to minimize some stuff so I can move around a little easier. Let's grab the sprite renderer and assign it to sprite renderer. Heading back into the code, right here after we get the horizontal input, I want to say if it's positive, you should face right, and if it's negative, you should face left. So if horizontal input is equal to, no, not equal to, if it's greater than 0, then sprite renderer has a method called, a field called flipX. And if the horizontal input is greater than 0, that means we should be facing right. The default is facing right, so it means should it be flipped? No, it should not be flipped. Else, if horizontal input is less than 0, then sprite renderer dot flipX should be true. Now, notice I didn't do anything if it is equal to 0, and the reason for that is if it equals 0, if I stop moving, you shouldn't flip directions, you should just stay the direction that you're facing. But let's push Control S to save and go back to our game to see how that turned out. Okay, now I can move left and right, and I've got my walking animations in place and working. The next item that we want to add is jumping. Now, in order to do a jump, what I want to do is just add like a momentary explosion underneath my character to propel them up into the air. So in order to do that, this is a physics-based operation. I want to apply some force to the rigid body. So let's go into the code, and I'm going to make a jumping variables section. And the first one is I have a public rigid body 2D, and I'm going to call it, we'll abbreviate just to RB. Okay, I'm going to save it and go back, and just like I did with the animator and the sprite renderer, I'm going to grab the rigid body. So here's the rigid body 2D, and I'm going to drag it right in there. Now, I have to move down a little bit because all of this is having to do with moving left and right, and I want to create a new section here. If I press the space bar, so that would be if input dot get key down key code dot space, and that all that to say if I'm pressing the space bar, then take the rigid body and add force to it. Now, which direction do we want to add force? We want it to propel our character upwards, so that would be vector2 dot up. Now I'm going to put a comma here. Now the other part I need to say is what type of force we want to do. So that would be a force mode 2D dot. Do I want to do force or impulse? In this case, we want to do impulse because that means that we're just doing it once, just for an instant, and then it stops. So let's push Control S to save. Let's see how our jump looks. Okay, here I am. I'm going to push spacebar to jump, and I've got this little tiny hopping jump. Oh, look, if I do it enough, he tilts over, and he fell down. Okay, so let's make it so he can jump a little bit higher. And the way that I can do that is let me go up here to my jumping variables here, and I'll do a public float, and I will call that jump force. And actually, let's give it a value here. I'm going to say that it's 3F right now. Now that I have my jump force in place, I want to go down to where the jump is actually coded and say vector3.up, and then let's multiply it times jump force. Control S to save. Let's go back into the game and see how that looks. Okay, moving a little bit and then jumping. All right, that's a much better platforming jump. Okay, now there is a problem here, and what I want to show you is I can just hit the spacebar as fast as I can, and I can fly. Now there might be a game where you want this effect, but in this case, this would kind of defeat the purpose of our platformer because I don't need to actually plan my jumps. I can just fly through the level. Now the problem is I'm allowed to jump at any time. I would like to jump only when I'm on the ground. So I need to write some code that'll determine whether or not I'm on the ground. So the first thing is I have to label the ground. So I'm gonna zoom out here. Here is the ground. That's my grass and dirt tile map. I'm gonna add a tag on here. And that tag is going to be ground. So now when I go into my code, let's go back to my jumping variables, and I'm going to add a private, because I don't need to edit this from the outside, a private boolean, which means true or false, called is on ground. And right now it is true because I start on the ground. Now over here, when I jump, as soon as I jump, I'm no longer on the ground. So is on ground is now false. Now I'm looking right here and it says, if I press space, then trigger the jump. I want to add another condition on here. If I press space and I'm on the ground, then jump. So I do that by pushing and is on ground. Now, since this is a Boolean, I can just say is on ground, and that implies is on ground is true, but I can also do is on ground equal true. Those two mean the same thing. I'm gonna delete that though because I like this one better. Let's push Control S and let's see how that one looks. Okay, I'm gonna jump. I can jump just fine, but now I'm trying to jump again and I can't jump anymore. The reason for that is that I've hit the ground and now is on ground is true. I'm sorry, I jumped and now is on ground is false, but now when I hit the ground, I need to change is on ground back to true. So let's go back into our code and add that functionality. I need to create another method on the outside of my update function, and this is the onCollisionEnter. So this is a public void onCollisionEnter 2D, and I have an object called collision. That's a collision 2D. So if that collision is the ground, so collision.gameObject.compareTag, if that tag is ground, then is on ground is now true. Okay, so that should make our jump work. Let's go test it out. Okay, I'm gonna jump. Gonna jump again. Nope. Okay, sorry about that. I made an error here because over here I created the tag ground, but I never actually tagged the dirt map. So if I go back here, it still says untagged. I actually do have to put the tag on it. Okay, so now that means this should work. There we go. All right, now I can jump as many times as I want, but I can't jump while I'm in the air. Okay, the last component that we need to add is to add the jump animation. So let's go ahead and go back to the Animator. And here's the jump animation. And I want to be able to enter into the jump animation from my idle. So let's go ahead and click on idle, right click and say make a transition to jump. And I also want to be able to go from jumping back to idling. Do I want to go from walking to jumping? Yes, I do. Walk can go straight to jump. Do I want to go from jumping to walking? Not necessarily, because what I could do is go from jumping to idling. And then as soon as I idle, if I'm moving, I could go back to walking. Okay, so I'm going to create a new Boolean parameter called isOnGround. And at the beginning it is true, so I'm going to check that off. And right here, to go from idle to jump, we're just going to say that the condition is that just a moment. There we go. It froze for a second. Is on ground would be false in order for me to go from idling to jumping. And let's go ahead and take the exit time off of that. And then from jumping back to idling, I'm going to take the exit time off. And then I'm going to say is on ground is true. And then again for walking, let's go ahead and change that. So going from walking to jumping happens when is on ground is false. Now, just like last time, we're going to go to the script and we're going to set that trigger. So right here, we're going to say is on ground is false, and then the animator should set a Boolean. It should set the is on ground Boolean to false. And then when you touch the ground again, animator dot set Boolean is on ground is true. Okay, let's go ahead and push Control S to save, and let's test out our game. Alright, so we see I can move to the right, walking, left, walking, and then jumping triggers the jump animation. I can go from walking to jumping, and it looks like everything's working.